begin with our session here on easy document assembly. This is a reprise of a session that we did last year about this time. I almost retired this presentation because I thought maybe it was just a little too simple. But after chatting with folks over the last few weeks, I kind of thought, no, it really isn't. I think it's okay to talk about some of the easy to do items. And then I was also at an event on another topic, but related to automation. And someone in the audience made an interesting observation and said that, really, when we're talking about increasing our efficiency in process, it's not a giant leap forward. Hardly ever is it just a huge leap forward. Typically, it's just itty bitty steps that we take. And over time, the simple things that we do are really what generate the better efficiency over the long term. And so, when I reprised this edition of this seminar, I created a situation where I hope I can show and articulate not individual steps, but not only that, but also the progression of how that works from simple word features up into more advanced document assembly tools. And so that's really the second half of this presentation that I want to cover. But first, I want to just do a quick little bit of introduction on this. So, what do we mean by document assembly? Let's start off super simple. What do we mean by assembly? Well, you may be familiar with things like Hot Docs or the Minnesota version of MinDocs, which is often referred to as something like TurboTax for lawyers, meaning that you answer a questionnaire. You answer questions from an interview, and that at the end it outputs a document for you or a series of documents. That's sort of the traditional view of what assembly is, but I'm taking a much broader look here, and just to say that when we refer to assembly, we're talking essentially not this, not just a blank slate. We're not beginning in a bespoke fashion with a blank roll of parchment paper and pen and ink. That's not how we typically draft our documents. We have almost always some other kind of starting point, and it varies widely. I like to compare document assembly with the writing style of Nora Roberts. Vanessa, I hear your folks also chime in if you're having any trouble with sound. Let me know, and I can pause. I like to compare assembly with Nora Roberts' writing style. The New Yorker some years ago did a story about Nora Roberts, did just a biography of her work. It was very interesting, and what they said was that Nora Roberts may be the most intuitive writer since Noel Hot Lead Loomis, who wrote several dozen westerns straight into a linotype machine he kept in his house. Right, so we don't, as attorneys, draft our documents in that fashion. We don't begin with a blank parchment, beginning to end. We're not intuitive drafters of documents. Nora Roberts here never makes an outline, does most of her research on Google, doesn't keep bios on her characters, and that's fine, I think, for a fictional narrative. But it does lend itself to certain inconsistencies, right? The article noted that the plotting can be erratic. In Tribute, Matt and Josie's son is called Sam on page 274, but by page 392, the name became Ethan. That's a pretty egregious change of character there. At least with the J.D. Robb books, it just went from Morse to Morris. I think that's maybe a little easier to understand. But I think for narrative fiction, we don't care, because our only reference in that kind of document are internal to the characters. We're not referencing out to any external source. So for us as attorneys, we're needing some of these things like outlines and other starting points to make sure that we're not missing anything and generating these kinds of inconsistencies. That's why any kind of lawyer drafting, I think, is always some form of assembly with alternative starting points. For example, we will use a secondary source. We'll jump into, a prior work product is a very, very common one. A little bit more advanced features like forms and templates are commonly used. And then, of course, we've got what we refer to as, the proper assembly, but assemblable documents. And we'll take a quick look at each of those. This is one of my favorite jumping off points. I still use, in fact, this particular blog post from Ken Adams. Ken Adams writes a blog on contract drafting. He keeps a regular post, and I know, for example, that anytime I'm redrafting and incorporate by reference provision, that there was a case and that Ken Adams wrote about it, but I can never remember the text. So I'll just do a simple search on his blog for this phrase, and then I can find that blog post, and oh yes, it was this case, and here's the recommended language, and I can go back and take a look at that. Wendy, yeah, other folks, if you're having a problem with the sound, let me know. I should also say that we are recording this session, and it will be in our library for folks to take a look at as well afterwards. Secondary sources. The problem, of course, with the secondary source is that it's quite a bit of hunting and pecking. We're doing a lot of looking at multiple sources. Sort of think of it as, going to 12 different grocery stores to pick up all the ingredients you need for just one dessert. It's very inefficient because you're picking and choosing, hunting and pecking for a lot of different resources when you rely on secondary sources like this. Prior work product is a very, very common starting point. And one of the things that I think a proper document assembly product can help us avoid the problems associated with using prior work product. Prior work product makes sense because that library of our work, I think, is a good warehouse of the knowledge of the firm, and absolutely makes sense for us to rely on that as one kind of starting point. But of course, the risk here is each of those documents represents a unique transaction, and you don't necessarily remember from time to time what you tailored this document towards. So did you delete some text that is commonly in this kind of document, but deleted it for this particular transaction? Are all of the pronouns that you used in that prior document, are those still accurate? And have you taken proper precautions to remove that prior client's information and the prior client's metadata from that particular document? So there's a lot of risk, often referred to as sins of commission, adding in that client information, and sins of omission, forgetting that you've deleted some stuff that's common to this kind of transaction. Those are the risks of using your prior work product. Is that is a transaction at one point in time, and it doesn't necessarily consider all of the items that you might want to include in your particular document, in which case you can go back to, oftentimes you'll use prior work product in tandem with another resource like a checklist or another form. That's often something that you can do, but also you can see why that's inefficient. While you get all the information you need from a checklist, you're still doing that hunting and pecking and looking for the additional provisions that you need to add into the new transaction. Forms, again, forms a great starting point. The challenge here is really just editing. You've got to jump into each of the fields represented by the form and edit the document, review each of the sample clauses, and hopefully this form represents, or is a good form and represents the common types of transactions that or pleadings that you're familiar with, and you're not missing anything with the form. And there are a lot of good form resources that folks rely on. Things like business transaction solutions. There are great secondary sources in a lot of different industries that are just really great resources. But really the challenges here is in the assembly process, which includes a lot of editing of the document. Very challenging to and not as efficient as it could be. Templates is a really good solution, and something that I think a lot of us don't use enough of. So if you're in Word, for example, rather than just editing a form, you can save that document as a template. So you're assured to start with the same starting point at each time. A lot of us will open up a Word document and then do a save as to create a fresh version of that document, but we still have that risk of leaving in that prior content from the old document. Whereas if you create a template, when you open up that document, it's the same starting point each time. And then when you save that document, it's saved, at least in the Microsoft world, if you save that, then it'll save as a docx file. But when you open the document originally, you're opening it up from the template file, the .x file. That file is always the same starting point. We'll take a quick look at an example of that as well. But so templates are a great starting point typically, and gets you a long ways and saves you from some of the risks that are associated with using prior work product or just a simple form document. Okay, so assembly, sort of in the common sense of the term, as I said, it's often referred to as TurboTax for lawyers. And this is just a screenshot of TurboTax. You can see that it's a simple guided interview here. Talks about your personal information and walks you through the federal taxes, etc. You enter in your name, your date of birth, your social security number, etc. And you just follow through the interview. And at the end, it'll output the documents you need to file your taxes. Essentially the same thing. There are a lot of products like this in the world of legal, and we'll take a look at a couple of those examples. And there are a lot of really great tools to help us build that kind of resource. But the challenge here is that they're just very, very complicated to do. There are common tools you might be familiar with. HotDocs, which is where we built our MinDocs documents. MinDocs being the sort of the TurboTax style of legal form automation. But HotDocs is the underlying technology that we use to build those forms. Another one is called Contract Express. It's a Thomson Reuters product. Really great, but typically with something like that, you're going to either have to hire a programmer, or you're going to have some level or comfort with programming yourself in order to make, in order to plug in that kind of information onto your Word document. It's much more sophisticated. Now we're going to take a look at some tools that sort of are as advanced as HotDocs, but don't require that deep level of coding knowledge. But just to say that that's primarily the risk with these assemblable documents, is that your investment here is not in the completing of the forms, but in learning how to use the tool. Now, you may be familiar with Affinity Consulting, which is Baron Henley's program. I believe he's got a 3-day program that you can attend on HotDocs. So there are really great and easy to attend lessons where you can learn how to do this kind of stuff, but it's a heavier lift on this side. You get a lot of value on the other end of it, but your investment on the front end is learning how to do the coding. We'll take a look at some ways to maybe simplify that in the second half here. So we trot out these slides with a lot of our presentations, but when we're talking about, how much time should we invest in doing this kind of work, do I learn how to use some of these assembly tools, or even, do I take the time to invest in just updating my knowledge in Word? And we have to look at this slide. I like this one. This is typically we'll bring out the Clio Legal Trends report, which summarizes our work in an 8-hour day, saying that we spend 6 hours of our day on administrative matters and about 2 hours of our day on average on substantive legal work. This slide is from a presentation by Deborah Rohde, who is, I think, maybe more commonly known for her work on access to justice. But it's a very similar slide here, and we'll see this in the Clio slides as well. About half of our work is dedicated to administrative matters. 30% of our work is dedicated to marketing, essentially, and only 20% of our work time is dedicated towards substantive legal work. Now, as law firms, we're business owners, right? We are not necessarily always going to have time for 100% of substantive legal work. I think it's important to point out that I don't know necessarily whether this is a good number or a bad number. Because we're running a business, it's common that we have a lot of time, a lot of administrative time that we need to dedicate towards our business. Not everything is about making the money in that direct sort of way. We have to consider how we're spending that administrative time, and that's a point I want to return to in this presentation. So here's the Clio Legal Trends report. What they call the utilization rate they've identified, because what Clio does is they rely on the underlying data. Clio is a legal practice management tool used by thousands and thousands of law firms nationwide and in Canada. And they take the underlying data to measure what's actually happening. And what they're finding is that the utilization rate, the amount of time each day that an attorney is actually billing for, comes to around 2.4 hours, meaning that 5.6 hours are missing. Now, I don't love that phrase that it's missing. We know that it's filled with administrative work because Clio asked them, what are you doing with that time? Is it proper to say that this is too much time? Is it truly missing, or are we using that time to properly run our business? I think those are questions. Those are still open questions. The realization rate accounts for the stuff that we discount or write off. So we're actually billing 1.9 hours of our time, meaning that we've got a missing 6, and then 1.6 is actually what's typically collected. So there, you've got your write-downs and then just write-offs for the folks you weren't able to collect from. What's interesting about the Clio League, I like to pair this with the Thomson Reuters solo report. The links to these documents are in the slides as well. I'll make sure that they're in the practice law library for everyone. But it's interesting when you ask attorneys, and this is a smaller set of about 300 attorneys, but in the solo to small space, whereas the Clio is thousands and thousands of attorneys and it's actual data from different size law firms. But I strongly suspect that this has to do with not relying on the data, but the opinion of how much time, so the 7 to 10 lawyers, knocking it out of the park with nearly 70% of their time allotted to substantive legal work. Not 20, not 20 at all, but nearly, and on an average 60%. And I think that has to do with the fact that it's a survey question. It's not based on the underlying data. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. And not only is that 6 hours, I think, not missing, but we have to think carefully about, actually think about the data, the underlying data, and how we're actually using that time. I'm going to cruise through, in the interest of time, a couple of these slides. Just to note that the write-offs vary. The Clio Legal Trends report did a nice job of measuring the utilization rates for various practice areas. It's worth a look, I think. And then from their survey, as I say, they determined that about 50% of that admin time is, or of that that so-called missing 6 is dedicated to administrative work. So I think that, and again, just to return to that idea, how are you spending that administrative time? And here I like to mention the effective hourly rate. So I just threw up the logos here of a number of the document assembly tools that are available, hot docs. We're going to take a closer look at Community Lawyer. Woodpecker is an interesting new tool that was presented at the ABA Tech Show last February. But when you have these conversations, and you'll see this conversation happen repeatedly. Originally, this slide came from the ABA Tech Show, where a consultant worked with a firm to reduce their drafting time from 10 hours to 1.5 hours. And it was for a flat fee project that they charged $2,000 for, making their average effective hourly rate for that work at the 10-hour time period, $200. Well, if you are able to spend a day learning the, one of these products, and you're able to make that document production automated, now you're in a situation where your drafting time is 1.5 hours and your effective hourly rate is increased to, $1,333 an hour. So how are you spending that administrative time? I would argue that if you're learning how to use some of these cool tools and drafting your documents, that you have to dedicate towards that you allot properly to something other than billable time, of course. But if it's improving your effective hourly rate, who cares if only 20% of your time is dedicated to substantive legal work? So that's the message I have for that tool. This is another point I like to make in the assembly world, is that often works especially well in high volume, low margin practice areas. These are the results of a survey that the Bar Association did among their membership. And the idea here was just to ask folks, what practice areas they were involved in. And, something like, not surprising, I think that nearly 40% of all of our members are doing estate planning and probate work. As a result, those are folks who I think who could certainly benefit, business and corporate. We're going to take a look at a couple of those examples where you're drafting, a very, very similar document. That's not to say that the lawyer isn't required here. That's not at all what I'm saying, but you're reusing commonly used documents. You're starting from the same common starting point very, very frequently. And in order to make your business sing, you need to be able to do a lot of volume, because you're not typically charging as much for your services as, say, a litigator. Just pointing out here that I think one of the reasons we present this is that a lot of our members are in a position to benefit from document assembly. Now, this slide, I still like to bring out Richard Suskind's spectrum of commoditized service delivery forms here. I know a lot of us are sick of it, but if you're not familiar with it, let me just do a quick review. Richard Susskind, in a book called Tomorrow's Lawyers, said, there's a lot of work that we treat as if it were bespoke. That is like a bespoke tailored suit. It's fully tailored. I use my own. I always forget what the individual steps are in Suskind's spectrum, so I adopted my own based on the text of Richard Susskind. But it begins with just a very bespoke service where we're starting fresh. We're only using our wits, our training, and our creativity to address that particular legal problem. We're not relying on any other starting point. On the far right end of the spectrum, you've got a fully commoditized service, which is sort of an off-the-shelf service where you have very little, if any, lawyer involvement. And I think most of us are beginning at least right here in the standardized part of the spectrum, using a tool like Practice Law, which has got forms and checklists and things like that that we can use as starting points. And then many of us are even using document assembly or a systematized or automated process to develop our documents. Now, MinDocs, for example, is for attorneys. It's not for consumers. And so when I finish my interview in MinDocs, I take a closer look at that document. I download it as a RTF file, just meaning I can open it up in whatever word processor I'm using, and then I edit that document to my liking. So if there's a provision that's not in there that wasn't part of the interview, I can add it. Or if I want to include a different style sheet, I can do that. I can update the formatting of the document. So kind of right in the middle of the spectrum here. And then LegalZoom. LegalZoom is more of a packaged service. It's a deliverable where any consumer can log in and use the service and fill out the form and connect with a lawyer if they need to. And I like to include LegalZoom here. This is a slide I found on, or a picture I found on LinkedIn that describes, lawyer as, Aquaman, and LegalZoom as this fella here. Now, when I showed this slide last year, somebody said, well, look, this guy is using a tool that actually exists and is useful, and the lawyer here is using a Trident, which is fictional, and besides, it was a horrible movie. I said, okay, fair enough. But what I always like to point out with LegalZoom is if you ever watch their advertising, what you see on television is the client connecting with an attorney. You do sometimes see the legal forms in here, but I think too often we describe LegalZoom as a legal forms service. I know a lot of our members say that they see incoming clients who use the service only in that matter. In other words, somebody just filled out their LegalZoom, it wasn't right for them, they didn't connect with an attorney, and therefore the attorney, our members, are needing to fix the problems that LegalZoom created. But if you watch the way that LegalZoom was designed, it was meant to direct consumers to attorneys, whereas the automated feature of the LegalZoom forms was just meant to get them started, and it delivers that completed form to the attorney. So most of us, I think, are right in between here and right up until the LegalZoom, but I think there's good opportunity for us to sort of jump over into the LegalZoom area here, to jump over into this automated feature. We could build in effect with some of these tools our own LegalZoom platforms and be proper competitors, I think, with LegalZoom. And we'll take a look at a couple of ways to maybe do something like that. And my apologies for the long text here, but I just wanted to give one example of that sort of LegalZoom style setup. I don't know if you're familiar with Cooley Go. I'm going to jump out and take a look at that their website here quickly. But Cooley Go is set up that same sort of LegalZoom style interface where they deliver, the corporate package. So the bylaws, the articles, and the various other documents that come with a corporate setup, give it away for free, right? They set it up, and what they said is, the idea here isn't to take money away from the firm, but what they believe is that there is a difference between tasks that can be automated and guidance that really can't be automated. He said if there's something that's subject to being automated, we shouldn't hold on to that and just create a high margin business out of something that's likely to become free in the future. And so what Cooley Go is doing is sort of taking that marketing play. Last week, we did a marketing event where we talked about these little explainer videos. And we looked at a handful of attorneys who produce a lot of video and put it up on their website. And it looks like they're giving away a lot of free advice. But they're just these great little nuggets of information about the kind of work that they do. They give a quick little bit of advice. And what it does well is, I think, demonstrate a great depth of experience for that particular firm. And then does a good job of telling the audience about what kind of a law firm those folks are and what they're about. So it's a good filtering tool. They get good clients coming in because they're more familiar now with the kind of work that firm does. And I think that's what you get out of something like this. Take a quick look at Cooley Go here. This is the website, and you can see there's just a ton of free information here. And all of these packages are documents that I can just fill out. I went ahead and opened up these ahead of time. And you can see I've got here the Delaware Corp. I can set up a C Corp. or I can set up a public benefit corporation. I've got a little progress bar here and an outline of all the stuff that I'm going to be doing, my document options, my founder information, I list out my directors, all of this stuff. I just walk through the step, and when I'm done, I get a package of these forms here. You can see this is all conditional, so if I want the restricted stock purchase agreement, it gives me a little additional information. This, as you can see here, this one was created using the Thomson Reuters product, Contract Express. So it's interesting that, I mean, this is a lot of information just to get for free. But and from Cooley's perspective, what they're doing is getting the automated stuff out of the way so that they can direct customers, their clients, to the higher end services that they have to offer. Oh, and yeah, like again, a lot of free stuff. All these little helpful links here will jump you out to additional information. You know, the basics of a corporation, a nice in-depth, and again, just links out to additional content with the recommended documents here on the right-hand side. Really, really great service offered by Cooley here. Okay, so that's my long introduction. I want to walk through some steps, those sort of gradual itty bitty steps on document assembly. Typically when I'm doing something like this, when I'm creating a form, I'll start with that, that secondary source. So what I'm going to do here, I'm logged in to my.minbar.org, and our practice law library is here, right? So this is that the form library. This is not prior work product. This is, well, I should say some of it is prior work product. There's good stuff in here from various members. We've got this item here called trial books. These resources are, all the documents from complaint to closing argument in a particular matter type. So this is good prior work product you could use as a foundation. The one I'm going to highlight because it's good practice management stuff is in the practice management folder under the Minnesota Lawyers Mutual folder. You've got all kinds of documents from MLM coming up here. Now, when you bring in that document, the first document isn't of much help typically because it's just sort of a raw form. I'm going to bring up the file closing list here and bring it over from my other screen. If I can grab it. Right, there it is. So this is the file closing document that MLM provides. And what's nice about this is that it is a form document. It includes a lot of the stuff that we should consider when creating a form like this for ourselves, but MLM does a nice job of reminding us that this is just an example, all right? We may need to tailor this for our own purposes. And there are a lot of other reasons why, just aside from the substance of why I might want to update this, you've got kind of wonky formatting here. I may not like the font and the styles in this particular document, and for me to use this as my document requires just a lot of additional work. I have to do a lot of formatting to get the work done, and I have to manually type in each of the fields and reformat it for my particular purpose. So that document really is just, I think of it as the raw material for what it is that we really want to begin creating. So the next iteration, typically when I'm using that form as my raw material, the very first thing that I do is using tables. This may seem obscenely simple, but I think you can see right away the improvement that this makes in the formatting of this document. And there's something to be said about an easy to read document that slightly increases our efficiency. And so what I've done here is just created a table with various fields. Now, when I'm creating the document, what I do is I grab this little menu item here for borders, and I show the view, this item here, the view grid lines. When I'm completing this document, and once I'm done with it, I'll get rid of that. So all I see is the field information, and then I can begin typing in what I need. I don't lose my underlining here. I get a nice clean document, simple formatting like including the shading here gives me an easier look. And so just reviewing the document later has, again, a very, very small increase in efficiency, I think. So a good addition. Now, if this is my last step in creating this form, what I might want to do is make sure that I create a clean version of this document, eliminate all of the data, and then when I do a save as, what I want to do is save this not as a docx file, but as a .x file. I want to create that as a Word template, right? So the next time I open it, it'll open up a fresh document for me with the exact same starting point. And when I save that document, it'll save as a doc file, as a docx file, which I can place in my regular document management system. Don't save that one. And then to take, but maybe we're not done. Maybe, there's an additional step that we can take. I'm going to bring over my third sample here, which includes additional information on it. So what I've done here is added a few content controls here. You can see I've got what is a date selector here. These things I think are actually more than a incremental step in increasing the efficiency of filling out these documents. Something like a date selector saves a ton of time. I know there are a lot of web forms that sort of set up these date selectors not very well, or the browser interferes with my ability to view, and it caused me a great deal of frustration because I can't see the date picker. The browser web form functionality will obscure it, and that's frustrating for me because it takes me a lot longer to fill in this closing date if I have to manually type it in. So something like a date picker is very, I think, a good additional next step. I've got a drop-down checklist here as well, where I've included the name of the attorneys who I can add in for this particular item. I've got check boxes for additional information in my means of return column here. So how do I add that stuff? Well, what I did is I added this developer. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger for us too. I added this developer tool to my menu, and what you can do is customize your ribbon. So what I've done here in the upper right hand corner, just where there's some free space in the menu bar, I want to add this developer because typically that's not part of Word when you just launch it. What you need to do is customize your ribbon, and you can either do that by right-clicking on a free space in the ribbon, and then just clicking Customize Ribbon, and then look for the Developer tab here, and just make sure it's selected, and then click OK. The other way you can do it, if you can't find it or if you don't have any free space, go to File and Options. And then your customize ribbon option is here, and you can add in developer from there. And there's all kinds of good stuff that I can add. So from the developer, now I've got all of these items up here. I've got basic text boxes that I can add in. You've got your date selector, drop-down menus, check boxes, all manner of stuff that you can add in, just to, again, just that slight increase in your ability to make that document easier to fill out. One of them I especially like is the ability to add in these looping blocks. Now, if you click on this section here, you can see that I've got a number of controls in here. I've got this quick part selector. So maybe, for example, I've got a common phrase that I use to complete this particular section. If I click on the quick parts gallery, it'll open up that text I can quickly add in from. I just have the one, but that's in the insert menu, and you can manage a auto text in your quick parts gallery, and you can create these little snippets that you automatically paste into various documents that you have. Still editable here, so I can add in additional text if it's not exactly right, but I get a good start using the quick parts gallery. And then this block here too, I've got a date selector and the ability to make off several selections. Now, what I love about this is I also have this little looping or repeating block here. So maybe this is just one category of content that are materials to be returned, and I need to add in another. I can click that plus box, and it adds in a whole nother with all of my content controls in the new box. Very easy to do here. So when you select particular content here, then you add in, it's this item here, I'm sorry, it's this one here. You add in the repeater, the repeat control, and it allows you to add in that additional block. If we look at the design mode here, you can see that I've got these little end brackets here, and I've got 2 here and 2 at the end here, just indicating that the start of this and the end of that repeating block is here. And so that when I click that plus box, it's adding in all of this content, the quick parts selector, the date selector, and my checkboxes with a new blank. So I'm not cutting and pasting. It gives me a brand new blank, and I can update as I need to. You can also, in the design mode here, edit how you label that particular information. I'm going to also look at the properties section here too, just to demonstrate how you can update the some of these content controls. So this is the picker, the attorney file picker, for example. If I click on properties, all I need to do is click on add, like C. Okay, it's added to the box, and you know, I can alphabetize these if I want to make it even simpler. Again, very, very simple, but if you've got 10 in here, you know, you may want to order these either alphabetically or by the folks who are most commonly performing this kind of task. Very, very simple efficiency builders. And we have a nice assemblable document here just using Word, and very, very simply in Word using those content controls. So based on that, you know, what is there any other additional steps we might take to improve this document? Well, as you can see here, there's still some manual work to be done. I haven't inserted the client name or the file title or the matter code. This would require me to go back into my files or open up the paper file or go into my document management system and look at that data in order to populate that kind of thing. Now, there are a number of tools that allow you to automate that kind of process. You've got something called Docsera or the Forms tool. The one I'm going to demonstrate is something from the practice management side of things that allows us to do that. I'm going to close this one and just bring over my 4th sample of this document. And what you can see here is that I've got these little field identifiers, or what are commonly referred to as field variables. Each of these variables represents a field in my document management system, which means that now when I create this document the next time, it will automatically include this information. And I'll show you how that works here. I think I've got Practice Panther open somewhere here. Let me see. So I use Practice Panther as a demonstration here just because I've got a free sample that allows me to do it. But almost all of the practice management platforms right now have this kind of tool, an automation tool here. And Practice Panther is pretty easy to demo, so I'll use this one. Now in automation, in the automation menu, I have these various tools. I'm not going to jump into payment plans or workflows or intake forms in any depth for today, but just know that you know, a lot of that data that we enter in can be handled by the client, like with an intake form, right? So you get name, address, all manner of additional information about that particular client to import into your, you know, that properly speaking, I think is document assembly. It populates your practice management system so you don't have to do it manually. It's automated by the system. Workflows does a similar automated feature where it walks through certain tasks and assigns them to attorneys within your firm. So for example, once a file is ready for closure, it'll automatically assign a particular person in the firm that task. That's another nice little automation feature. But the templates here, I like to highlight. These are the document templates that we use. And as you can see, I've included our file closing document here. I've created it. And the way that I did that, you saw with those field identifiers, with the variables, they're just all listed right here. Because the system recognizes the fact that I might want to use that field in one of my documents, all I have to do is jump in here and click this little copy button. Once I've copied that, I can then insert it just with a paste into my document. Now that document is ready to receive data from Practice Panther or your practice management system. You can customize these kinds of things. In almost all of the platforms, I believe you can customize your the particular fields that you're using. You can rename them. But the benefit here is that once you're ready to close that file, when I go to Matters, I've got just two in here, I think. I can go to this one in particular, and now when I am reviewing this matter, I can click on this New button, and I can apply a particular template. And I'll have a list of templates for this particular matter. I've got file closing, limited scope, and a welcome letter. In many cases, it's just 2 clicks. You're not editing a full document. You can create quite a sophisticated document without doing much work, and it's just 2 clicks to create that finished document, the limited scope agreement, for example, or the welcome letter. So this would follow on workflow from an intake form where I would automatically be able to generate my limited scope agreement with the information that's been provided by the prospective client. Now, in this case, though, I'm just going to, for the sake of consistency, include the file closing document here. Downloaded for me, appears in the lower right-hand corner. I'm going to double click to open that document. And there it is. You can see that the data is automatically included in here already. If I enable editing, so I can edit this document afterwards, all of my content controls are still in here functioning so that I can continue on editing that document. Now, with a little bit of investigation, we could certainly imagine where 90% of this form is completed by Practice Panther. For example, if we had the proper workflow built in, I probably wouldn't need to choose my attorney manually here. That'd probably be automatically generated by the system. So I like this. I like this walkthrough. I like this progression from the very simple using the table to add in our particular underlines and document structuring, to the content controls, to incorporating these documents into the practice management automation tools. Very simple steps, I think, to get you going in the right direction. From here, is there anything else that we might like to do? Is the next question. So the thing to think about here, I think, is that, look, what you've got is a great automated document. The only thing that's really missing from here are really a set of conditionals. So by that, I mean, if you don't have the ability with a document like this to enter in these sort of if-then statements. So if, for example, the client is in Minnesota, then you incorporate, such and such provision into the document. If that can be done in Word, but requires quite a bit more, I think, advanced knowledge of how to do that. But the way we've set it up here, some of those conditional formatting, where you're updating the document based on what the client or attorney has said about the situation, that those provisions are entered in provisionally based on what you know about the interview. How do we get that done with a document like this? And so there are a couple of ways to do that. One is, as we talked about earlier, is you can use something like Hot Docs or Contract Express from Thomson Reuters, but that typically is going to require a certain comfort level with coding of documents. That's a big step forward. But there is a whole class now of what they're calling no-code services. And I've got Community Lawyer plugged in here. And here's how a lot of them work. It's just this little plugin. It's an add-in to Word that populates this sidebar. That Woodpecker, which I introduced a little bit earlier, had a similar setup. Now in Woodpecker, what it does is it reads the document on the left and then suggests your fields here over on the right. And in Woodpecker, you can actually build your conditionals right here in the sidebar, which I think is kind of an interesting thing to do. I'm a huge fan of Community Lawyer, so I'm going to demonstrate a little bit more of this one here. You can see I've got no app selected. All I'm going to do here is just grab one of the apps that I've got built in this platform, and as you can see here, it adds my ability to insert variables. Here are all the variables that I have set up in there. And as you can see, once I click on it, it just automatically populates wherever my cursor was, that particular variable. So I can create quite a sophisticated document here by plugging in these variables from the Community Lawyer plugin. Well, now where is that app? How do we get that particular field? With Practice Panther, it was generated by their practice management platform. How do we do that? Well, with Practice with Community Lawyer, get rid of a couple of these. Here's Community Lawyer. I'm going to pause for a question too, because I see someone asked a question. Okay, here's Community Lawyer. Community Lawyer is, as I say, this idea of a no-code service. And the way you build that application is by creating these different kinds of blocks. Now, what I'm going to do is just show you what this looks like first. This is something from just their free library. It's a demo that they included in their library, and it's just a simple web app that you're able to create yourself. It creates this little info block here. I can click continue after I've read. These are all, as you can see, required fields. This is a date picker. I wasn't born yesterday. Number and an email, so on and so forth. And when this is done, it inputs document into an online database where I can be alerted to the fact that I've got a new, because this one in this case is an intake form. But this product also allows you to output documents, emails, and other manner of items. And I'll show you what that looks like. This is something that you can build. The Community Lawyer has a free version, which I think is kind of exciting. So if you're comfortable sharing that that document with folks, you can do that. And what we're doing in the community library at Practice Law right now is sort of creating now 3 versions of documents within the Practice Law library. One is you'd get the text of the document. You also get the a buildable version using the Community Lawyers application. You also have the ability to copy this recipe so that you can adopt it for your own purposes. The idea here is that typically the form is just the raw material, and any developed app really meets the needs of one attorney. But if you really want to own that document for yourself, you can copy the app and edit it for your own purposes. And that's what I've done here. I've copied it, and maybe I want to do some editing. What kind of editing can I do? Well, the simple thing to do here is just to add a block. And you can see there are all different kinds of blocks here. I can add a question block. The first one, just with the general info, is just a text. You can add images, things like that. You can add signature blocks to this kind of thing. Now you can add looping sections. For example, we've got one form in practice law right now where it says, in which states are you admitted? You picked one state, and then it asks you, are you admitted in any other states? And if you say yes, it takes you back to the same question, sort of like the repeater section on the closing form that we looked at. These are also include the conditionals that we need. I think we see some conditionals here, right? So in this case, if you don't live in the U.S., you click no. In other words, if this variable live in U.S. equals false, in other words, they've clicked no, this field pops up, and but this would not otherwise appear, right? If you click yes, this field does not appear. You only need this information if that information has been added, and it's just easy to add in. You can see. Anytime you add in a question here, you've got the option to do the show if function, and you can create the variable, the conditional that you need there. So this requires, it does require a little bit of learning, but it is much, much easier to do than learning how to code in HotDocs. And you get a lot out of this, I think. The other block that you can see here is the payment block. I'm just going to click on that so we can add it. You know, this is something that you could add to your own library of forms, right? If you're delivering something to a client, you can create this for your own purposes, right? We can say, this is a document that you're going to pay for on the front end, enter in your credit card information. You also have to align it with either your LawPay or a Stripe account. But you can set this up so that before the document is delivered at the final block, that they have to pay for it. Or you can, even before they start the interview, you can, wherever you want, you can insert this Stripe block. And of course, if you want to require, for example, that the client contact you to do that, you can set up you can plug in your scheduler here. This is just a schedule a time with me here, right? And then I add in my scheduler. And now when this block appears, they'll have to enter in a calendar event with myself, enter in the credit card, and move on from there. And then they get the document. At the end, there's a final block, and these final blocks can deliver any number of these templates. The templates you set up, like we saw in the Word document, you can use the plugin to create your Word document template. But you also can create email. A brand new service from and this is the way this one is set up, brand new service from Community Lawyer is the ability to send data somewhere. So to Clio, if you want to do an advanced or your own very personalized intake form, for example, you could send it directly to Clio. You could send it to another Google Sheet or to a separate database that's housed within the Community Lawyer platform. In this case, it's just set up to a Google Sheet that's would be behind your own say your G Suite account, so it'd be private. But then, of course, from there you could do some further automation. So once there's an addition to your Google Sheet, it maybe triggers an event on your practice management platform, or an email to your inbox, or onto your Trello account. You could use something like Zapier to further automate that process. Very, very cool feature, ability to send data to a particular data warehouse in addition to creating a document. So just like Cooley Go created that package of documents, you could do that as well by selecting, I don't have any set up here, but you can set up a list of the list of those forms, and you could deliver the full package of documents. As you can see here, you've got Word templates that you can create, just like we did using that sidebar. You can use PDF if you want, and you can set up a variation of email. So actually, when I think this one also delivers an email, if I remember correctly. No, this one does not. This final block does not include an email template, of course. And then data source here. This allows you to pull from your own data source. Here's just just enabled the way to pick the states from a drop-down menu, but creates kind of a nice, I think I can show you that block. There's the info block. And one of these includes just you can create a table selector. So in other words, if you want to, this data source selector creates a table, and I can select that as my source. So right now what I've got in there is just list of states, but I could create a much more advanced table that allows me to create a lot of variables based on the information that's in that particular table. One thing you can do is from the homepage on the Community Lawyer, if you click this little discover icon, you can see how people have developed some of these things. This one here, for example, this rent relief letter, this one's open and available to anyone who wants to look at it. And you can see how they've used their data source tool to create that more complex data selector tool. And there's just a ton of really great, there's recipes for various kinds of problems here. This help guide has got a ton of video to help you create various document assembly tools. Very helpful. What I love about Community Lawyer is that, you know, not only are they new, but they're developing very rapidly. They're very responsive to feedback, which I like, and their help is just amazing. Oftentimes I'll just, you know, chat in here and I'll be connected right away with someone even after hours when I know that they're not available. They'll respond anyway. And then these help guides have really great video walkthroughs. So if you're trying to develop something, there's likely a video there to help you find it. All right, one last quick thing. I just want to introduce folks to some of the new AI tools that are out there, and then I'll pause for questions. There are two tools that I know some of our members are using currently, so I just wanted to maybe get a little your thoughts on how or whether you think these might be valuable, or if, you know, this is anything you'd ever like to learn more about. I don't know, but what these tools are doing is something beyond just the structure and format of the document and inputting data to the document. This is actually introducing substantive legal information into your document assembly. So this is Compose. This is a new product from Case Text that was demoed at Tech Show back in February. And what this is doing here is, you can see this introductory video here, is assembling our motion to exclude expert testimony. Now, you know, this works pretty well for federal motions. Makes kind of sense, I think. But what's true with a lot of these AI-generated tools is that they're very limited in scope. So typically, you know, AI tools work great for very limited practice areas, for very limited jurisdictions. And in this case, it's just these common motions for federal practice. But as you can see, what's happening here, it's giving us that outline of the document on the left. We're just adding in the clicking the add button to update this document to create the motion for us. And what'll happen is, if you want to add in a particular argument, you just type it in addition, and click the search button. I think there's a demo of that coming up here. Let's take a look. Yeah, here they type in the specific language, and then they'll highlight it and look for support for that particular argument. Highlight it, do a search in the case text database for cases, and then it'll deliver a case. And all you have to do is click the add to get the Blue Book citation into that document. Pretty slick. Now, this isn't cheap, I think, but again, you know, if you're thinking about your admin time, this is about $1,500 to get this done. You get a sort of a free trial. We get to test one out. Your first motion is $99, and then thereafter it's $1,500 per motion. But you're getting this done in just a fraction of the time, I think. So curious to know if anybody else is using this and sort of what you think about it. There's another tool I'm just going to wrap up with, something called Legalmation, which again, I know that some of our members are using, and it's sort of a similar mode here, where you upload your document and then it outputs the answer for you along with the discovery requests. There's an interface that walks you through some interview type questions where you can tailor the argument, similar to Compose, but it's the same kind, but it's very automated. You can do that with a complaint or with your discovery requests. I saw a demo of this just yesterday. What was kind of impressive about it is, the draft objections, read the document and summarized the objection in a great natural language output. I think it used the term foraging. It had something to do with chickens. It was I think it was the demo I got was a discovery request based on a dentist who choked on a item from a chicken, and it was the discovery objection, I think, had something to do with, well, we knew that everyone should know that chickens are commonly foraging, and that kind of item might end up in the gizzard of a chicken. But that kind of phrasing was output by the artificial intelligence. It wasn't something that was already in what they call the trained corpus. It wasn't in the data set. It was something that the AI delivered to help us get the document completed. Really, really incredible service. But again, this too, very limited. There is no Minnesota tools here. These are in the 7 most litigious jurisdictions. So Illinois, California, Florida, New York, jurisdictions like that. Minnesota is not included, but I know that some of our larger law firms are using this as a tool. So just very curious to know whether folks are using this resource or have any interest in that kind of thing. So that is all I have. I'm going to pause for questions. If there's any tool you'd like to take another look at, another run through of Community Lawyer or Cooley, let me know. I will linger in the chat here for a little bit. Also got, by the way, I forgot to mention earlier, I'm going to paste in the code. This is the event code for today's event. I'll also drop that in on the YouTube side of things. Apologies, I got that wrong here. 301-438. 301-438 is the event code. Stuart, I see your hand is raised. Did you want to throw in a question in the chat? Happy to reply if anybody's got questions. Also, thanks, Tim, for the the audio tip in Zoom. I appreciate that. I think these days we all need a second person on the tech side of things. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I will sign off. I'm going to just also drop in my contact information. You're welcome to reach out to me individually, offline. Angela, does anyone have an estate plan posted on Community Lawyer yet? I know the answer is I don't believe there's one for Minnesota, but that's an easy one to put together for sure. Mindocs does have estate planning package for very simple estates, and you might be familiar with this Minnesota CLE product has got I think it's called Minnesota CLE Pro. I'm forgetting the name of the product. That one's a little bit more advanced for deeper estates, but that again, that's something you could absolutely develop for yourself. They've got some featured items here. Power of attorney. Our board managed operating agreement is highlighted here. law student projects. But I haven't put it into practice law yet, if that's what you're asking. I was kind of wondering if there might be a an item that was just already on the community lawyer application. But this is something that certainly we have interest in developing for the practice law library. If you're interested in building something like that, we do have a developers community. The folks in that community get sort of a free training on community lawyer from the platform's CEO, and he's really great. He's given a couple of demos that are just very solid. But you get a free one-on-one training if you join the developers community. You can also just, if you're interested in doing that, feel free to reach out to me through that email or phone number. I'll post that into the YouTube chat as well. I'll show you off. If anybody's still lingering, I will maybe just show you what that looks like in community or in practice law. I think I've got one. Where do we have those? Business law. That one that you saw posted in the featured on community lawyers down here. This one here, the board managed. So you can jump right to the assembly product if you want, or you can copy and modify the app. So this operating agreement is just the text of the form. We automated that using community lawyer. So if you just want to fill out the interview, you can do that. Or if you click on the build option, you can, in addition to editing, launching the document to test it, you can click the duplicate app and add it to your own community lawyer account and then edit it for your own purposes. All right, I will wrap. Thanks, everyone, for hanging on. Again, if you've got any questions, I'd love to know what you think about those new AI-generated tools as well, especially if you're using something like that. I'd very, very much like to know kind of what your experience is with any of those AI tools. I think they're interesting, probably worth the price, but I'd love to know just from a lot of these other tools that we've just got more hands-on experience. Those AI tools, because of the price, because they've only been adopted by a handful of members, haven't heard as much about them. So I'd love to have your feedback on those if that's something you're using. If there's nothing else, I will sign off. Otherwise, reach out to me individually. Thanks so much. Oh, I apologize. I see I've got a couple of questions. Category 3, does this CLE count as one of my CLE? Yes, this is a live CLE. This is not on demand. It's a live event. So you can report this as a live CLE. At any rate, for the folks who are in this current category, I believe the Supreme Court is permitting you to, for this next upcoming reporting period, I forget which category it is, for this upcoming reporting period, you can do all of your CLEs through on demand. This event, however, is not on demand until it's recorded and we distribute it that way. If you're on it right now at this moment in time, it's a live event. And then CLEs, what list of CLEs must a new lawyer complete and how many are required? I believe it's the same whether you're a new lawyer or a senior lawyer. 45 credits every 3 years. And then you've got your EOB, your elimination of bias, and your ethics requirements. One question I got a lot of was recently, is this a law office management credit? And strictly speaking, I don't think that's a category any longer because there's no limit on the number of management credits you can report now. That limit has been taken away. Then how do I submit the CLEs I have completed? Go ahead and reach out to me individually. We can walk through the OASIS system at the Board of CLE. Feel free to reach out to me there. All right, folks, thanks so much. You guys have a great afternoon and stay healthy, stay safe.